Hello everyone, DonTheCrown here, back again with another video and another tool to help you have a better launch experience with Diablo 4. So one of the things I noticed that I was doing for myself is I was going through all of the different Codex powers that you can get for finishing out dungeons for the Barbarian and kind of listing them all out. And my teammates were also doing the same thing for their classes. And I was kind of like, this could be a pretty good list to get in the hands of everybody. So I went through and I looked at all of the Codex powers for all of the classes that I thought were going to be pretty useful, and I made them into these pretty handy-dandy, snazzy images here, and I put these up on my Discord. These are really easy to get access to. All you need to do is click on the Discord link in the description below. You'll be sent to this channel here, which assigns you roles. You just let it know what type of alerts you want. If you click no alerts, you will get no alerts to my channel or my Discord. I don't really like when Discord's like ping and pong you with that everyone and that here. We don't do that on my channel at all. Let it know which games you're interested in. And if you click the Diablo 4 one here, you'll be able to click on the Diablo 4 game convo. And right here at the very top is the resources where all of these images live right now. So definitely check those out. If there's any sort of changes, I'll definitely update the images there as well. And so pretty easy. So I'm going to hop into explaining kind of my thoughts behind these. We're going to go class by class. Some of these are going to be really obvious for all of the classes. So I probably recommend at least watching the Barbarian one here, even if you're not a Barbarian, because I'm probably not going to cover all of the ones that are basically good for everybody. So let's hop right into it. So right off the bat in Fractured Peaks, there is the Protector aspect, and this gives you a 10-second barrier whenever you hit an elite every 30 seconds. So it's basically up 33% of the time during long boss fights, and it is just a great aspect, especially for early game, to help you survive more. Now, if you're playing with a Sorc or you are a Sorc, you might want to wait to do this particular dungeon, because this is the exact same dungeon that Sorcs need to go into in order to get their enchantment system. So you kind of kill two birds with one stone in that case. Next up, the eluding aspect gives you unstoppable if you are injured, which is like below 35% HP, while you are crowd controlled. And so if you're a hardcore player, this might be something that you're incredibly interested in. It also might just save you some time if you're in softcore. Next up, we have anemia. This is basically a really great bleed barb build. Basically, it allows you to stun enemies with a lucky hit if they're bleeding. And pretty much every single barb build is going to want to include some sort of bleeding, because we have hamstring, which allows us to slow enemies, and slowing enemies is a crowd control, which triggers off a whole bunch of crowd controlled enemies multipliers for all sorts of like weapon stuff. And it's just really overall amazing. Next up, slaking aspect is really good for Rend. It basically gives you a little bit of lucky hit for a refund of Fury when you use Rend, and basically getting Fury back in any way, shape, or form, especially while you're leveling, especially early in the game, is incredibly powerful. This is a theme that you'll notice across all of the classes. Anything that is providing resources is very strong, because we're just going to be pretty much starved for resources for the most part, and the more resources you have, the more DPS you can blast out, and the more fun it is just going to feel. I really enjoy builds once you don't have to worry so much about all the resource management, and that's what these types of aspects will do. Next up, we have Skazglen, which has a lot of really great aspects for a lot of classes. I'm really excited we're going to get to experience this finally. And so Inner Calm is pretty good. It gets damage while standing still. Some classes really enjoy this. If you're playing a Barbarian where you're just like face tanking against mobs, you're going to get a little bit extra damage. Expectant makes it so that you're using basic skills, increases your core damage. This is really good because you're probably going to be using your generators a whole bunch, and this will buff the next use of your core skill, and so it's really just a no-brainer. Edge Masters makes it so that you do more damage based off of how much resources you have when you use a skill, which is also just a no-brainer. The more resources you have, the more damage you do. This makes you more effective. Ghostwalker aspect is also really nice. This makes it so that when you are unstoppable and 4 seconds after being unstoppable, you get an additional move speed buff. And so this basically turns Rallying Cry into an even bigger speed boost for you, and it's just really awesome. Next up, Ancestral Force is really good if you're planning on going Hammer of the Ancients. This basically makes it from a small single target style skill to something that radiates out. And this is the type of thing that you might even just want to pop onto your two-handed slashing weapon, so you can just have it all of the time, and that pulse out is doing the most damage that you can get from the Codex. A quick reminder that all of your powers off the Codex are going to be minimum rolled, so it's not going to be the best rolled possible, but it's still pretty good. The other big kind of build-defining aspect you get from Skazglen is Dire Whirlwind, and what this does is gives you increased critical strike chance with Whirlwind, and so I would probably pop this onto a two-handed weapon as well if you're planning on playing Whirlwind. And I think Whirlwind will be very, very, very strong, especially in a group, if you can get the aspect that sucks enemies in when you're whirlwinding. This will be definitely very good to get you a lot of crit chance, basically for free, just for doing what you're planning to do already. Next up, we're going to the Dry Steppes, and so that's like to the west of where we were in Fractured Peaks, and Umbral is nuts. This is a really good aspect. You basically get resource back whenever you crowd control enemies, and so that's like when you slow them with your bleeds, that's when you shout, taunt, challenging shout. That makes it, you know, a taunt is a crowd control, so that makes it so that you can almost fill up your bar completely if you have enough enemies around you, which is just incredibly strong because you can bump out a ton of damage, shout, fill up your bar again, and then keep doing damage. It's great. I really love this one. Rapid aspect makes it so the basic skills gain attack speed. This is big because the faster you use your basic skills, the more you build up fury, so you can use your core skills. It's basically like a more resource modifier for you. Next up, Berserk Ripping. Might not be necessarily super great early on in the game, but depending on your build, especially if you're doing like a double swing type of action, Berserk Ripping is going to give you a lot of damage. This basically makes it so that when you are berserking and you deal direct damage, you get an additional bleed on enemies, and that is just incredibly strong because it's based off of like the damage that you're doing already. You're just getting more extra damage, and that is just the type of thing you definitely want to look for. And I believe the minimum roll for this is going to be 20% of base damage, but if you throw this on like a two-handed weapon, you'll be able to obviously double that, which is pretty nice. Next up, we're going over here to Kyrgyzstan. Disobedience, I think, is one of the best defensive aspects in the entire game. Probably like something you're going to use on every single build. So being able to pick this up off the Codex is nuts. What it does, it gives you more armor when you deal damage, and it stacks up. And yeah, armor basically is very strong in Diablo 4 because not only does it reduce physical damage, but it also reduces non-physical damage as well. It is just very, very strong, and Disobedience stacks up to 25% more armor on the Codex, and so this is a obvious pickup for most builds if you want more defense. Wind Striker's aspect makes it so that when you crit, you get more movement speed. This is really nice if you're doing that whirlwind build. You can slap these on your boots, get more move speed. That's very nice to get. The control aspect here makes it so that you deal more damage versus some CC. And then we come to Echoing Fury. Echoing Fury is like stop the run, immediately go into this dungeon when you go by it. It is very, very strong. If you've looked at a lot of Barbarian builds, you'll notice that they're using 2, maybe 3 shouts, and Echoing Fury really makes that pay off in a big, big way. So what this does is it makes it so that each shout will generate 2 to 4 fury per second while active. Obviously on the Codex it'll be 2 fury per second. And so if your shouts are lasting like 7 seconds with booming voice, extending them from 6 to 7, that means that every time you shout, it's basically a generator for 14 fury, and you'll be able to just keep shouting it out and getting more fury. This is really solid. If I drop this naturally at like a 4, I would probably keep that ring all the way to like world tier 3 or 4 potentially. Very, very strong aspect. Next up, Iron Blood aspect. This one is incredible for defense as well. You get damage reduction for nearby bleeding enemies. Now, what nearby necessarily means in this sense could really be anything. Hopefully they give us a little bit more understanding of what that means. But yeah, increased damage reduction for anything you've basically hit being around you is always a good thing. Next up, Relentless Berserker's Aspect makes it so that if you have a lucky hit on your core skill to extend Berserk, and if it's a crit, it goes even farther. This works pretty nicely with Whirlwind because Whirlwind will be critting quite a bit, and you hit quite a bit with Whirlwind as well. Lastly, Hawazar, which is south of the Fractured Peaks, we're going to get Brawler's Aspect, which makes it so that when you kick or charge enemies, they explode if they die within 2 seconds. So I definitely use this in the beta to just kick an elite directly through a pack of monsters. All of the monsters that they pushed their way through died and exploded, killing the elite along the way. It's great fun. Highly recommend this one, at least to just check it out and have fun. If you're not like in a super fast pace, this is definitely something that you might just want to take a second and go get. Numbing Wrath is really good for support or for damage reduction as well, just supporting your defenses. And you get every time you generate Fury past the cap, it'll turn into Fortify for you, which makes you more defensive. Next up, we have Earthstriker's Aspect, which I was kind of hesitant to put on here because it's a little bit janky. It's basically when you swap weapons, I believe 10 times, your next attack will be guaranteed to overpower, but that's kind of a pain in the butt to pay attention to. Ooh, sorry about that. Next up, we have the Druid. And so Druids are one of these classes where you're going to get quite a bit of aspects on the Codex. It's going to make you a lot more powerful. And I think you'll see what I'm talking about when we get to Skazglen. So first off, with Fractured Peaks, the Protector aspect, just like everybody else, and the Eluding aspect, both of these are really, really strong, especially if you're playing in hardcore. Night Howler's aspect, what this does is it makes it so that Blood Howl, which is that heal every 15 seconds, I believe. Is it 15 seconds? I believe so. That's going to make it so that it also affects your allies. So now it's a nice support option. If you're playing with other people, I'm sure they're going to be happy to basically be getting a free healing potion every now and again. And it also gives them crit. So it's just a really, really nice aspect. If you're playing Shred, Stormclaw's aspect and Unsatiated really help buff up Shred as well. And definitely would want to probably consider picking these up. Next up, Skazglen. So we have the Intercalm, Expectant, Edgemasters, Ghostwalker. All of these are really, really good for Druid. Ghostwalker especially here because it allows you to turn your Earthen Bulwark into a movement skill because you have Unstoppable for like the entirety of the Earthen Bulwark and then for a little bit of time after that. It's just a really, really nice combo. Next up, we have Overcharged Aspect, which is a lucky lightning pulses type of thing. I've been told that this really helps out with the clear speed quite a bit for Druid, which I think is something that's pretty good. The next three are basically the crazy three for Earth skills in Skazglen. And so we have Ballistic Aspect, which makes it so that if you have any Fortify at all, you just get +2 to Earth skills. It's quite a bit. That's quite a bit. That's like an additional 20% of base damage. That's very nice. Crashstone Aspect. Earth skills crit damage is increased against enemies that are crowd controlled. You have a lot of crowd control as a Druid. If you're playing with a Barbarian, anything they're hitting is basically crowd controlled. This is very, very nice. Doesn't really work against bosses all that much, but you know what it is. Next up, Aspect of Quicksand. This makes it so that Earth skills also slow. So if you don't have any crowd control at all, you can lean on Aspect of Quicksand to basically allow you to double tap enemies to get like the guaranteed slow on the first Earth hit, and then you do big damage, critical damage on the next hits, which is pretty good. Next up, Dry Steps. Umbral is really sick on Druid. Very, very nice. Mostly because you get those resources whenever you crowd control. Might makes it so those basic skills grant you damage reduction, which is good. And then Rapid Aspect makes it so that the basic skills also give you attack speed. All of these are great. Retaliation is a Druid exclusive, which kind of annoys me as a Barbarian main, but it gives you core damage based on how much Fortify you have, which is really nice. This definitely will be something that Werebear Druids really want to pick up. because this will help out with those gigantic pulverizes, doing even more damage. Shepherd's aspect might be like one of the best aspects for druids to pick up. This just gives you a more core damage multiplier based off how many companions you have, and you can like stack up to, I believe, 9 total companions if you get the aspect that gives you more companions. And so this is just a great, very passive damage multiplier for your core skills. Mending Stone works with Earth and Bulwark. I believe this extends the duration of that. That works great with Ghost Walker from Ska's Glen, so that you're moving faster for longer. Kajistan, just like everybody else, Disobedience is just absolutely broken. Wind Striker aspect works really good with Earth skills as well to give you that crit movement speed. Cyclonic Force is nuts. This basically makes it so that your Cyclonic Armor or your Cyclone Armor no longer just gives you elemental resistance, it also gives you physical resistance, and it applies to basically everybody around you. So if you're at the world boss or you're in a dungeon, a party, everybody is benefiting just from you standing there with having Cyclone Armor, which is very, very nice. Skinwalker's aspect, I hear, is incredibly broken with Shred, because basically what this does is anytime you use a shape-shifting skill that shape-shifts you, you heal, and if you're full health, you fortify, which means that if you use one Shred and you turn into a werewolf, you get heal, and then you can like use an auto attack to come out of werewolf, and then use the second charge of Shred, which doesn't cost you anything, to heal again, and then you can pop back out into human again with your basic skill, and then Shred for the third time and heal even more. One of the guys in my chat was saying that he had this on the world boss of Shalva during the server slam, and he was just unkillable. He just couldn't die because he was just using this combination. This seems really, really ridiculous, and if you're playing Shred Druid, highly recommend that you pick this up before you go into Capstone or even harder, more difficult content. Next up, we have Storm Shifter. And what this makes it so that Hurricane, when it's active, gives you +2 ranks to shapeshifting, which if you're using Hurricane, you can get these +2 ranks, which just means more damage, which is pretty good. Lastly, we have Hawazar, makes it so that Ursine Horror is one of the ones you can pick up. This makes it so that Pulverize is now an Earth skill, which means that you can benefit simultaneously from Storm Shifter and Ballistic Aspect. So you get a total of +4 levels to your Pulverize, practically doubling the number of points that you can put into this particular skill, which is kind of mind-blowing for just a leveling build. I highly recommend, if you're doing Pulverize, that you want to pick this up. Rampaging Werebeast works with Grizzly Rage, and then Vigorous Aspect is damage reduction while in werewolf form. And that is really, really nice if you're playing werewolf. Just taking less damage is kind of like just having healing going on all the time, because you don't have to heal the damage that you are taking. So very good picks here. I think Druid kind of really pops off really hard with the Codex. It's kind of a shame that we didn't get to have access to all of this during the testing. I kind of think that the public opinion of Druid would have been a little bit different if people had been able to see all of kind of the craziness on the Codex, like compared to the Barbarian, where I don't really feel like there's all that much synergy. The Druid is just like has so many good things all working together. So definitely get some of these powers. Next up, we have the Necromancer. And so the Necromancer, just like every other class, is going to want those protector and looting aspects. And then they have 2 really cool blood aspects in Fractured Peaks. So Blood-Bathed Aura makes it so that Blood Surge Nova basically echoes out a second time, but does less damage. But this is just helping your clear speed in general. And then Blood Seeker's aspect is buffing Blood Lance. So especially if you're going Blood Necromancer early on, this is just 2 aspects that you probably want to pick up so that you have good or better clear and better single target. Aspect of Torment is pretty decent for bone crits, granting you increased essence regeneration. I believe this isn't as big of a deal as it would seem, because I think you go from like 3 or 4 essence regeneration per second up to 5, or like just +1 basically, which is not super duper huge, but since we're kind of low on resources early on anyways, you know, a little bit can go kind of far. And if you need to finish out dungeons for XP or renown or something, this is something you might want to pick up. Skazglen, you have that Inner Calm, Expectant, Edge Masters, which are all pretty good on basically every class. Ghost Walkers is a little bit weaker on Necromancer because you don't really have an unstoppable skill that doesn't like slow you down in a puddle, which kind of stinks, but reanimation is really decent. This basically makes it so that when your skeletons are living, they are just gaining damage. Over time, they're just increasing the amount of damage they're due, which is pretty good. Kind of wish that we had access to this in the server slam, because then I think the skeletons would have started doing a little bit more noticeable damage. Next up, Dry Steps, Umbral aspect, really good. You can basically make it so that your crowd control gives you more resources. That's good. Might giving you more DR, Rapid giving you more attack speed with those basic skills, and then the cream of the crop for Bone Necromancers, Splintering aspect. This thing is nuts. This is busted. Like, for Necromancers, I don't think there's almost anything else better on the entire codex, and this basically turns Bone Steer into a like clearing and party machine. Makes it so that your Bone Spear just does more damage, and it just applies vulnerable to like everything it hits, which is really great for being in a group because vulnerable is a very powerful damage multiplier. Next up, we have Potent Blood, and this makes it so that when you're full HP, blood orbs heal your essence bar as opposed to just being consumed and not doing anything. And so if you're playing blood build, or you have the aspect that makes it so when you consume corpses, you get blood orbs, or heck, if you're just using hemorrhage as your basic skill, this can allow you to get more essence quicker, and pretty nice. Kajistan, we have Disobedience. You know, everybody's using this. Wind Striker aspect is great for bone skills. This allows you to turn your critical strikes into movement speed. Bone skills just crit all the time. Like basically every time you throw one out into a pack, you're going to get a crit or two if you have geared up correctly by this point. And so highly recommend this. Speaking of crit, Grasping Veins makes it so that corpse tendrils increase your critical strike chance. That's very good as well. It also groups up enemies for you, so you can be more effective with throwing your bone spears into the same pile. That's good as well. And then Damned is good for a shadow build. If you are double cursing, you're going to do more shadow damage, which more damage is good. Lastly, we have Hawazar. Blighted aspect makes it so that when the Shadow Blight key passive deals damage, it kind of like ramps up a little bit more. And if you're not familiar with the Shadow Blight key passive, it is basically the thing at the very bottom of the tree down here. So this is like shadow damage, infects enemies with Shadow Blight for 2 seconds. It makes you and your minions deal more damage to them. And then every 10th time an enemy receives shadow damage, you or your minions, from you or from your minions while they're affected by Shadow Blight, they take a 20% shadow damage like tick on them. And this particular aspect, let's find it real quick. Oh, where'd it go? So Blighted aspect here, this is in Hawazar. You deal 50 to 120% increased damage for 6 seconds when Shadow Blight key passive damages enemies 10 times. So it'll be 50% more damage just period. That is a pretty big multiplier that you can pop off, especially because if you're throwing your shadow damage into a big pack of enemies, this thing is going to go off a whole bunch. And I could potentially see this getting worked into other builds, not just a dot shadow build. Next up, sorry, the map got pulled away. We have a Sacrificial aspect. This is really great if you're a Necromancer that doesn't like playing with minions, because this will increase the bonuses you get from sacrificing those minions. Unyielding Commander's aspect is for a Necromancer that likes to play with their minions. This will increase the effectiveness of your Army of the Dead skill, and I believe it makes it so that they have 90% DR during that time, and they do a whole bunch more damage, which is just pretty cool, and really makes that ultimate feel like an ultimate with this aspect. And then lastly, Fast Blood aspect makes it so that when you pick up Blood Orbs, you get cooldown reduction for your ultimate. If you're already using blood orbs for like potent blood to give yourself more essence. This could possibly have a little bit of synergy there. Next up, we have the Rogue. So Rogue, once again, Protector and Eluding aspect, really, really good. You have the Flurry 360 aspect in Fractured Peaks, and then you have the Energizing aspect, which is really interesting because for the most part, your basic skills don't really provide you any energy at all on a Rogue, which doesn't really make sense. You just get combo points. And so this allows you to generate energy when you're hitting elites, which is a good thing. Skazglen Inner Calm is actually really good for Twisting Blades Rogue because they tend to not move at all. So they're just stabbing. So they get lots of damage, and they can even teleport to not count as moving and losing the buff from this. Expectant is pretty good. Edge Masters is really good for Twisting Blades because once you pop that Inner Sight, you are just non-stop full resources. Ghostwalker aspect is good because your Shadow Step will give you Unstoppable. This will give you more movement speed. Aerostorms makes it so that lucky hit with marksman skills create an aerostorm that rains down on enemies. That's if you're playing marksman skill, that's pretty good. Blade Dancer's aspect is the Twisting Blades aspect, and so you've probably heard about this a whole bunch if you're playing Rogue, but it's just incredibly strong. It makes it so that when you stab your Twisting Blades into an enemy and they come back to you, they spin around you a little bit and do extra damage, which allows you to proc extra lucky hits and just do more damage, period. Helps you pop your sight focus or your inner sight even faster as well. Cheats aspect makes it so that you take less damage from enemies that are crowd controlled, and movement speed is increased when you are hit by enemies that are crowd controlled, which is pretty good. Next up, we have Kajistan. Disobedience is good. Wind Striker is good. Crit movement speed. Corruption makes it so that your imbuement effects have more effect versus a vulnerable enemy, which is very good. Opportunist aspect makes it so that when you break stealth, you drop cluster bombs at your feet, which can give you some more needed damage against single targets. Vengeful aspect makes it so that when you are making enemies vulnerable, there's a lucky chance to increase your critical strike chance, and that stacks up. It's a little bit complicated, but I think that this aspect is pretty good, especially if you're going Twisting Blades. Lastly, over there in Hawazar, we're doing Trick Shot aspect. This is really nice because this is the penetrating shot aspect that makes it so that when you hit penetrating shot, arrows shoot out to the sides. Pretty good thing. And then Siphoned Victuals makes it so that lucky core hits on vulnerable enemies drop health potions. This thing is ludicrous. I remember doing a shovel with this particular aspect and the floor was just covered with health potions everywhere. This will basically solve any problems that you're having with having sustained life flasks or life potions, health potions on bosses. Very, very good aspect. And then lastly, Enshrouding aspect will increase the damage reduction of your Dark Shroud, which is always a good thing. Lastly, we have the Sorceress. So the Sorceress, once again, Protector and Eluding. I once again remind you that Protector aspect is in the exact same dungeon as your level 15 quest will be. So if you're not level 15 yet, you might want to hold off to get this particular one. Conflagration makes it so that when you're channeling Incinerate, you do increased burning damage. Recharging aspects makes it so that your Chain Lightning, when it bounces off of you, gives you more mana. This is something, if you're definitely playing the Chain Lightning build, that you want to pick up just so you can be able to cast more. Flamewalker's aspect makes it so that when you touch your firewall, you get more movement speed. If you're playing firewall or intend to, this is pretty good. Piercing Cold aspect is also really good if you're playing Ice Shards. I know this is a pretty popular skill for Ice sorceresses. Highly recommend this as well. Skazglen has the classic Intercalm, Expected, Edge Master, Ghost Walker. All of these are pretty good. Static Cling will help out your Charge Bolts a little bit. It's honestly not super strong, but I know Charge Bolt is probably going to be a popular leveling skill, so there it is. Snow Veiled aspect makes it so that your ice armor grants you Unstoppable, which kind of works together nicely with Ghost Walker's aspect. And if you're using ice armor, this is just something you might want to pick up. Gets you out of crowd control for sure. The efficiency makes it so that your basic attacks reduce the cost of your next core skill. So if you're like spamming basic attacks, waiting for your core skill to have enough, which for you to have enough mana for you to cast your core skill, this can kind of like speed up that process for you. Charged aspect makes it so that picking up crackling energy increases your move speed. I don't necessarily recommend going after crackling energy while you're leveling. It's kind of like a pain in the butt, it feels like, as you're like running through enemies, but this could be something that's like good for later on in the game. Next up, we have dry steps. Umbral aspect is really good, especially if you're playing cold Sorc or anything that's applying any sort of crowd control, because it just makes it so that you gain resources when you apply that crowd control. Always good. Basic skills giving you attack speed, also good as well. Storm swell aspect is increased damage to vulnerable enemies while under a barrier. Yes, it's a little bit of a conditional, but you tend to get a lot of barriers as Sorc anyways, so this can be pretty good. Bounding conduit is really good to give you more movement speed after a teleport. And then elementalist aspect is neat because it makes the core and mastery skills have increased critical strike chance when you cast them above 100 mana. So if you can be patient and you can like wait for your mana to fill all the way up, then you cast one spell, this will drastically increase the critical strike chance of that spell. Next up, Kazajstan. Disobedience once again is really good. Wind Striker aspect, crit strikes turn into movement speed. Probably would really recommend this unless you are playing the like chain lightning build that has decent critical strike chance. The bounding conduit will probably give you more movement speed, but I put it on here anyways. Incendiary aspect makes it so that when you hit with burning, there's a lucky hit chance that you'll just gain more mana, more spells, more damage. It turns out to be pretty good. Lastly, in Hawazar, we have 3 curses, which makes it so that meteors have increased critical strike damage against healthy enemies. If you're playing Meteor, Fire Sorc is going to be very strong, I think, in the late game. So highly recommend this. Snowguard's aspect makes it so that Blizzard gives you massive damage reduction. Not massive, but gives you some damage reduction, which is pretty nice. And then Prodigy's aspect turns cooldowns into mana. And, you know, like I said, more mana, more damage. It's good. And yeah, that's it for all of the classes. Hopefully I got all the ones that you think are important. If you think that I missed anything, please comment in the comments below. And we'll see you in Sanctuary. Come by the stream. Have a good one.